So, on the main channel, I gave you monkey news. This time I give you chicken news. And I'm going to talk about some stories from the UK because there has been a series of chicken news, and this is very important stuff, of course, and it's definitely not silly. But it does actually have an important political point here, and it's a point about tyranny at the both local and governmental level. And here we have a story, cockadoodle don't, man fined over cockerel's morning noise, which is very silly. So Harold Brown, 80, so he's an 80-year-old man, given £200 penalty after Hampshire neighbour complains over crowing he said was a croak. So he's complaining about the rooster's voice. He wouldn't mind it if the rooster were, a traditional rooster, but it's got a croaky voice. Give that rooster a lemsip or something. It says, Harold Brown, 80, was hauled into court over the nuisance bird, which was recorded crowing once a minute for an hour and a half by environmental health officials after residents complained of the continual cock-a-doodle-doo sound. Brown claimed in court that the noise was more of a croak than a traditional cockerel crow, but 6 of his neighbours in the residential cul-de-sac on the edge of Hampshire's New Forest complained. So I think the reasonable thing, if you have a rooster that is causing such a nuisance, is probably to listen to what people are saying and perhaps put it in a place where it's going to cause less trouble. As in, you give it to someone, or have a swapsy. You can swapsy roosters, can't you? And then it says they told Southampton Magistrates Court that they had to avoid parts of their house to get away from the discernible and significant squawking that would occur almost every morning. And it's a sort of sorry state that this has to go to court, because this should be something that should be worked out in a local community, really. And I'm sort of sympathetic to both sides. On the one hand, it's a rooster. What are you complaining about? It's, we grew up alongside these animals for a long time. On the other hand, I understand that if you're living on the edge of the New Forest and it's quite nice and quaint and quiet, and perhaps if you're elderly and there's constant noise, it's difficult to relax. And so it's just an unfortunate thing that this also gets to the point where it's national news as well. Brown, who represented himself during the proceedings, disputed the evidence and said there was a conspiracy from both residents and the New Forest District Council against him. I haven't seen the details of this. I can neither confirm nor deny whether this is true. And he said that he was handed a £200 fine after a district judge found him guilty of failing to comply with the abatement notice to keep the noise down. And apparently the nuisance occurred at his home address in Calmore. So this goes all the way back to October of 2022, when the council received complaints from a number of different sources who alleged the cockerel kept by the Browns was crowing regularly, which is the most local news thing ever. The prosecutor said the council felt this amounted to a statutory nuisance and served an abatement notice in December of 2022. It was heard that Brown did not abide by the notice, but soon after his pet cockerel died, which allowed for a brief period of respite for neighbours. But then soon afterwards he obtained another cockerel. So he's got a second cockerel, and the nuisance reoccurred. So I feel like if you had a cockerel and it was being a nuisance, you've kind of got to be a little bit considerate. Maybe get what you could do if you have chickens, get a cockerel in for a few days from someone else, get it to fertilise the chickens, you get more chickens, get rid of the cockerel again. This would have been a good and fair compromise, I think, after the point it died. And I think by getting a second cockerel, he ignored the will of his neighbours. And I do believe that, a man's property is his and it's not for other people to, mess with. It is, a man's house is his castle, so to speak. However, I do think you should be considerate of the people around you. And I feel like everyone involved could have done something differently to make this go better. And someone was really laying it on thick here. I often suffer migraine attacks, and often if you're suffering migraine attack and you're listening to a cockerel crowing, it's just a form of torture. I mean, I can see that, to be fair. Migraine's not nice. And the fact that they sent an expert as well, where someone went and was with a tally chart, just like another crow, another crow, another crow, because cockerels make a crowing noise, don't they? I know a cockerel's not a crow. I know there'll be comments, you're not allowed to do that. But this is not the only chicken-related news. This was the Tories. Chickens kept in gardens will have to be registered under planned new rules. So this was just the Tories, I believe, if it was March 2023. So you had to register your chickens and to the government, and this was to tackle bird flu. However, I don't see how registering your chickens necessarily helps, because normally with these sorts of things, we've had lots of various animal flus. They track it being reported around the country when people have mass die-offs of their livestock. They normally say to an authority, I've had mass dying of my, either cows or chickens or whatever, pigs sometimes. They'll tell the authority and they'll keep track of all of these cases, because believe it or not, people who keep animals don't want their animals to die and want people to take measures to stop them dying. However, registering them seems to be an unnecessary step in my mind, and it seems a little bit tyrannical. And this actually came into effect recently, and as Raw Egg Nationalist points out here, in the UK, if you own chickens, you now have to register them with the government. So people are registering roast chickens they bought at the supermarkets, and they've crashed the government's website. And he urges people to keep going. However, I would probably get in trouble if I said the same. So it's one of those things that there's the law of unintended consequences here, where people see something silly and they'll do something to interfere with it. And yes, I think that the way things are going to go with the Starmer government, you've got people in the local level getting fined. He's kept the Tories' chicken registration. And I imagine with his war on farmers, that the war on chickens will never end. War never changes.